Okay, so we've had Dr. Jeff Spencer on the podcast, and Dr. Jeff Spencer sends me a text and says, you should have Brian Bogert on your podcast. Now, a pet peeve of mine is people sending me texts, copying the other person and saying that I should interview them. Because sometimes I have a very strict criteria of who I want to have on the podcast. And them making that assumption has me have conversations that are just uncomfortable. Like, you're amazing, but I don't want you on the podcast because it doesn't fit the criteria that I have. And it's always an uncomfortable conversation, except when someone like Dr. Jeff Spencer says something like that, you just do what Jeff says. And that's what I did. I went and looked at who he was introducing me to. And then I lost myself for about an hour in Brian's content. It was so on the money for what I have been screaming from the rooftops, what I care about, what I want. I care about leadership skills. I care about, your success and your promotions and you're able to lead people. But I also care about your well-being. I care about the things that are holding you back. So that's why I thought Brian would be perfect for the show. So you ever hear the expression, I've been hit by a truck? Well, when Brian was 7 years old, he was run over by a truck. His left arm was severed from his body. After years of intensive rehabilitation and over 24 surgeries, Brian has a deep living understanding of how physical, emotional, and mental pain can keep people buried, regardless of what their initial trauma was. And like I tell people, I get on podcasts because I was homeless and became a millionaire. Right. So our overcoming those adversities and becoming the people we are give us an opportunity to talk about some of these things. So that has made that Brian's gift. He's a human behavior and performance coach, speaker, and business strategist. Brian disrupts the normative approach on how to create substantive growth and lasting change personally and professionally. His philosophy on how to embrace pain to avoid suffering, scanning the can, which is we're going to talk about, and taking out your emotional trash have helped individuals and companies discover and activate their limitless potential. He's also the host of the Flipping the Lid podcast, which I suggest and you listen to. We're going to put the link in the show notes because this conversation is the real meat and potatoes of what's going to move you forward. Brian, thank you for being on the show.
Mark, man, I'm so happy to be here. And likewise, it was one of those things when, as he calls himself to me, Uncle Jeff, sent me a text and said, I need to meet you. It was just a no-brainer. And it was one of those instant connections. He knew something we didn't in that moment. So I'm happy to be here, brother.
I appreciate it. So one of the things that you said, and stopped me in my tracks, and I was just thinking about it for a little while. You said, when I got out of the hospital, and this was back when you were 7 years old, when I got out of the hospital, people would see my arm. They would start to view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, which immediately was limiting to me. Can you explain that revelation?
Yeah, there was two things that happened when most people would ask me. They first wouldn't believe my story, right? They'd pause after I even was wearing my situation and would show them my arm, and they'd still look to my parents for validation. And then their inability to envision what their capacity could look like with the perceived physical limitations that they had in me, it literally, they would say, oh, you're never going to be able to ride your bike again. You're never going to be able to water ski. You're never going to be able to do this in sports. And look, from the time I was born, before my arm was even removed, separated, and reattached to my body, I'm like one of those people that, like, if I'm told something either to do or I'm told that I will never do something, you better damn well get out of my way. Because that is like the visceral reaction in me from the time I can remember. And so that's what shaped that first part of my life. Was I was told, and I heard all the way around me, that if I had good mindset, if I had a strong mental toughness, then I would be okay. And so this is mine. It was Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And I preached that verbally and energetically through the world for years. And it served me really well because I shattered the expectations of those people who were immediately limiting me because of what they couldn't see in themselves, right? And it served me well for a long time until it didn't. And then there was a whole nother situation that I had to go through to learn and unpack all of that. But the reality of it is how many of us have felt and experienced that in our lives, right, for any number of reasons, whether it's a torn off arm or something completely different, where because of how we look or because of what somebody can't see in us or in themselves, we're told all the things that we're going to do and not going to do in our lives. And by the way, I told you, for me, it's a visceral reaction. I've not met many people that like to be told how they feel and what they're going to be capable of. Most people don't like that.
No, but unfortunately, we believe it. Like even even if we're fighting against it, it gets in there somewhere. I knew this guy, Dr. Sean Stevenson, and Sean's like 3.5 feet tall,
Mhm.
and he had a disease that had his bones be brittle. And do you know?
I didn't know him personally, but I know of him through multiple of my friends. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm anxious to see where you're going to go with this.
Sean has a video on YouTube that's really great, but he tells the story all the time that the doctors told him he wasn't going to live past the age of 2, 3, 4, 5, right? He told his parents, and he went on to live to adult life, to get married, to get his doctorate, right? To entertain millions of people. And as he said, he outlived his doctors because he just
Mhm.
decided not to believe that.
Yep.
And we'll put some links to Sean's videos on this podcast because he's such an inspirational guy and changed my life. So I hear the same thing. Like, and for me, when I was homeless, like that story from homeless to millionaire, that actually was the easy part. The easy part is running on that fuel of I'm going to show them.
Mhm.
I ran for a good 10, 15 years on I don't want to be that homeless guy. I don't want anybody to see me that homeless guy, until again it turned on me, because there's that internal work. So I love the fuck you attitude that you came up with that got you through the formative years. What was the trauma that showed up later?
Yeah. So when I was 20, I never really let much stop me. I needed to kind of push the limits of death just to feel alive. And after you go through something like I did, and I was born already with a pretty high rush threshold, I had to always be doing things. So I was snowboarding, and I was a snowboarder. I was pretty good. I was in trick parks and did all these things. I wasn't gonna ever make any money or do anything, but I had fun, right? Like, I go down and I re-break my left arm, and I almost lose it again. And I go 10 months with it hanging by my side because I had 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me. And here's what surfaced as a result of that. I was at the time in college, surrounded by people, tons of friends that I'd been doing things with for a few years. Now all of a sudden I find myself completely isolated and alone in my apartment while I'm trying to go to school, and nobody was there. And so the trauma that started to come up for me at that time was I was not only getting like resentful and frustrated, right? Why are all these people not here for me? I've done this for all these other people. But ultimately, what I had to realize and surrender to is that they just all bought into the power of my narrative. See, they all believed Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself, but they added a fifth narrative to it, which was Brian will ask for help if he needs it. But I didn't have the courage in one of my most vulnerable periods in my adult life to do so. So that shifted a whole variety of things for me in that next period of time where I decided that I'm going to focus on vulnerability and authenticity, which I believe are the glue that binds human
Wait,
connection.
that's too fast. That's way too fast to uh so you're in your apartment and you're feeling
Mhm.
sorry for yourself,
Completely.
right? What was that like? Like from going from fuck you, I'm a snowboarder, I'm going to do these things even with
Unbelievably
one and a half
depressing.
arms, like
Yeah.
what? So that
It was
depression.
dark, man. It was dark. It was lonely. I didn't really want to admit how much I was struggling to anybody. I felt extremely isolated. I'm having to relearn things that I learned between the ages of 7 and 12 when I had support.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know, buttoning my pants with one hand, being able to tie my shoes with one hand, because literally my humerus was broke in the same spot that it came off at. So there was a lot of functionality of my left arm that I'd gotten used to and accustomed to, that now all of a sudden I'm existing like I was as a kid. But now I'm realizing as an adult, I don't have my parents around me that are helping me guide this. I don't have anybody that I can rely on. At the time, I was 20 years old and I was just trying to go to school and get through life. I put on 40 pounds in 10 months because I ate my feelings. I went from a place of having so much physical movement in my life to completely stagnant because I couldn't do much. Right. And so that was something that really, I mean, it rattled me. It honestly did. And that was one of those times when that's when I realized how disconnected I had become because of how much I'd been protecting myself in that prior life. Right. And it was all emotional and intellectual armor, honestly, that was put there in place because I didn't want to be seen and understood at a level, because I had been proven and told so many times that I was never going to be seen and understood and nobody was going to believe my story. So I just decided I'd hide it. Fort Knox thick, right? And this is where I now can see it with so much clarity, because I think we all seek and desire four things. And this was one of the beginning components where I started to be able to see this.
Hold
We all
on,
want to feel
before you go and be all smart on me, I want to know what helped you come out of it? What helped you turn the corner and find some gold in this and
yeah.
build up a new version of Brian?
I knew no other way. To be honest, it was survival. And I was not living in the same state as my family, and I needed to be able to do these things. My number one agenda at that point was to find a surgeon who would actually perform surgery. I mean, it was a compound fracture, right? And normally a compound fracture that goes through the skin like mine did would be immediate surgery right out of the gate. But again, I went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me over 10 months. They didn't want to have the medical malpractice and the soft tissue work. And so my number one thing was I need to get my bone reattached, because the real truth of the whole 10 months on that as well is I could have lost my arm at any moment. I mean, I have a bone hanging around inside my arm, and keep in mind, my veins, my nerves, everything is rebuilt. It's not anatomically correct because it was all built. My bicep is my gracilis from my leg. I don't have a tricep. And so there was this constant weight and fear of moving in the wrong way or getting T-boned when I'm driving my car, and literally being in a position where I wouldn't have an arm for the rest of my life, right? I'd done all this work. I'd regained function, and now all of a sudden I'm there. So the number one thing was getting it repaired. I finally landed with an orthopedic surgeon who was smart enough to realize that he didn't want to do the soft tissue work. He referred me out to another surgeon to do the soft tissue work, a plastic surgeon who had all the specialty. They were doing MRIs. They wanted to see where everything was mapped. And the plastic surgeon that I met with actually trained under the surgeon that rebuilt my arm. So what's interesting is I'm sitting there and he's like asking me these questions, and I tell him, yeah, Dr. Mark Gottlieb is the one who did the first 20-ish surgeries. And he goes, what? He goes, why are you sitting here talking to me? And at the end of the day, it was because of insurance reasons, and it was the funnel flow, and this was who this guy recommended. And so that's what it was. But he said, I trained under him. I still work with him. I talk to him all the time. I'm going to talk to him. Next thing I know, he's going in and he shows up at the hospital. He's the one performing the surgery. He does it all pro bono, and he remembered everything. But literally the first step was, I have to get my arm fixed, right? Now, what happened after that was I immediately went into rehab and recovery, which I knew like the back of my hand because I did it for so many years daily just to get function and movement back in my arm. Because as you can imagine, if any limb is stagnant for 10 months, it goes completely stiff.
Yeah, I saw a video of you doing it as a kid. There was
a video where, I mean, I only had like this much mobility right back then, but literally as soon as I get reattached, all my shoulder mobility that I had more than normal range of motion on every joint in my left arm went to, I couldn't lift my arm above here, right? I couldn't even bend my arm. So this was about as far as I could bend it because I was in recovery and everything was locked up. So those next couple of months were all about getting mobility back. And less about strength, more about getting the mobility and range of motion in my joints. Strength followed afterwards.
So what I'm curious about is how did you start to let the armor down, and go from this guy who doesn't need help and and is invincible?
I didn't.
Right?
I didn't. So what I thought I did, right? And this is where I was going with the human connection piece, right? I decided, okay, well, if I'm going to be perpetuating all of this, I'm not being vulnerable. I'm not being authentic. So those are 2 traits that I'm going to utilize to try to build and establish more relationships, right? And I believed that vulnerability and authenticity were those 2 pieces. But here's what the truth is. If I look back now, I didn't know this then, right? I got really good at sharing just enough about myself to get someone else to lower their armor so I could drive a Mack truck through and focus on their problems and still avoid my own. I just didn't consciously know I was doing it.
Oh, I'm good
right?
at that too. That's a
say that again.
I'm good at that too. That's such a great Tai Chi trick to keep people from getting close to you.
Yeah, and it worked to a big degree. But what I was also realizing is I was going into my senior year in college. I was that whole year, it was about getting movement, strength, and functionality back into my arm. And then it was, what am I going to do next with the rest of my life? How am I going to move? What am I going to do? What does my life look like? And I was really in seek a who. But all I had was a model from the world on what what house, what car, what amount of money. And so that's what I did. I built it all. And again, hindsight, at age 27, I had everything I ever wanted, full bank account, but I was empty inside and it cost me who I was. We built a really successful risk management employee benefits consulting firm. That was where my background was. It was amazing. But then again, I woke up at 27 years old and realized that I'm empty. I'm running in circles with people making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, and 8 figures, and I'm not the only one feeling this way. So that's when I started kind of, for lack of a better term, the internal healing journey. I just didn't know how deep it would get, right? And so that was another area of trauma that kind of I was starting to unpack, shame, and really starting to realize how it was showing up in my world. And fast forward another 5 years, I'm 32 years old, and I'm in this situation with my daughter where we're playing, we lay down on the couch, she puts her arm around my neck, she kisses me on the cheek, and she says, "I love you, Dada." And I broke down in tears, like bawling out of pure joy. And when this happened, it was so unique to me because I really had shut off tears years ago because that's what I was told, right? Like, don't cry, suck it up. I grew up in one of those homes, and given everything that I went through, especially, it's like, just deal with it type of a thing, right? So I'm crying in tears and realizing that, okay, wait a minute, if I'm experiencing this in this way, then every other emotion I've ever experienced is pale in comparison. And it changed the whole dynamic where I started to realize that vulnerability and authenticity are parts of the glue of human connection, but human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. And so what I realized at 32 years old is that when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, I shut off mental pain, emotional pain, and spiritual pain for 20 to 25 years, and I didn't realize it. I started to recognize in that moment that every time I tried to slow down just long enough to experience something more pure and more real in what I was feeling, that I was unconsciously suppressing everything so quickly that I didn't even allow it a second to sit. So that was the focus in that time, was just prolong this feeling, even though it was yucky and it felt like garbage. But that's where I had to get to. And then to hit on some of the trauma that I have to just call attention to, I used to believe that this was my transformation story. Like, this is my origin story. This is what it was. But the reality of it is it was the story that created the most trash from my past that I pushed through and pushed down for years. And it would show up in moments of reaction where my cellular memory is activating and I'm reacting to something that has nothing to do with what's in front of me, right? I told you I dealt with shame, but I also dealt with anger. I didn't even know I was an angry person. This is the crazy part. I was so blind to it that I never even realized it. And most people in my world didn't either, because guess where it showed up the most? In my home. My wife would say something as simple as this: "Hey, honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend?" But my shame and my anger filter would cause me to hear it this way: "Hey, honey, you've not done enough recently to be a good husband and father, so what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend?" Then what am I doing? I'm reacting to defend the fact that I'm a good husband and father, and now I'm creating damage and trauma in my own household because of my own energy. And the reality of it is most of it was connected back to that time when I first got out of the hospital, when no one believed me. And so I always felt the need to justify, defend, and ultimately it created all of these other things that almost cost me everything and everyone I ever cared about because of me and the unresolved trauma and what I call trash from my past that I hadn't dug deep enough to unpack and remove.
So what you're saying is that what got you successful was going to turn on you and have you lose your marriage and your family and all those things, unless you now, because again, a lot of people rely on that to become, I coach people who are super successful, like ridiculously successful. And to actually look at that fuel that they think that they need to get them to where they are is terrifying, because what if I don't have that to keep myself being successful? And they'll move through it. Our mutual friend Jeff Spencer talks about this time in midlife when something's got to change, right? Like you went through midlife around 32 when your daughter kissed you and you realize something has to change. Most people push past it and do lose everything and don't do that deep work. So when life says to you, do the deep work, and you don't listen, it's going to make you do the deep work.
Yeah. Yeah, some way or another, or it's going to build up over time to actually explode. And, I work with a lot of people like you, right? In the sense that I work with a lot of people who are completely financially independent and have all of the external definitions of success that the world has defined, but they're completely empty inside. They've not really ever lived this way. But that is the most common piece for most high performers, because there has been an element of fuel that's driven by that chip on their shoulder that's really coming from a place of armor. And the narrative that I hear from so many people is like, and I had this myself as well. Well, what if I lose my edge? What if I do all this work and I lose my edge? Right? So I won't go through the full detail analogy on this, but what's the purpose of a knife?
To cut.
To cut. Does it have any other intended purpose that you're aware of?
Spread butter.
Okay, great. I'll take that. You're right. Okay, but let's call it a knife that can cut, typically, right? A knife that can cut is designed with an edge. It's designed to be sharp, and it's designed for one sole purpose in this world. Now, you might as well just call that edge your armor, because what you're doing is every time you hold that knife up, you've got an edge about you that's going to cut through someone or something unconsciously. That edge also has negative ripple effects and issues. But do you know how they cut cheese? Do you know how they cut soap?
Yeah, not with a knife.
With string.
Yeah.
Pulled at the proper tension at the time that it's designed to cut the product. But what can also happen with string? It can fall down, it can wrap in a ball, it can fly a kite, it can wrap a layer of protection around the people that are in, right? And so here's the reality. I can be more flexible, and I can utilize the areas where I need to cut when I need to, so I can have that edge, but I also can allow myself to be more flexible. So then someone said to me, yeah, but if I'm a knife and you're a string, I can just come up and cut you. It's like, yeah, but that's assuming that I'm still pulled at tension. Mm-hmm. See, I can actually allow myself to let go of that tension. What if I wrap your knife 4 times around with the string that I am? I've just completely disarmed you.
Right.
Right. And so what I'm really helping people understand, and this same analogy can fit into what we see with the human experience, which is the reality of it is we all have the ability to be protector and connectors in every environment. It doesn't mean we need the edge, and it doesn't mean we need to cut. It means we need to know how to lower our armor and open up who we are to invite others along the journey with us.
So another quote that fits right here for me is to get the joy and freedom and fulfillment, you will feel a little like garbage. Right? Like in order to get to the joy and freedom and fulfillment, you'll feel a little like garbage. The work is really fucking hard. In fact, the inner work, the dark work, the clearing and identifying of the trash is probably the most difficult work you will ever do, but it's the most meaningful and will pay the greatest dividends in your life. Right? So when you're talking about taking that knife and turning it into string, taking that, like taking the risk of losing your edge to find out what's underneath all that armor, right? It's going to feel like death. It's not a pleasant, it's not a pleasant experience. And only those of us who've gone through it more than once can tell you what's on the other side. Because I think I've been through it maybe 5-6 times. Like I keep thinking I've arrived and I haven't, right? But wait, we can tell you what's on the other side, but you won't know what's on the other side until you go through.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I mean, I think that's one of the things with trash that we try to use an analogy around is how many people take out the trash in their homes or their businesses almost every single day, right? Like almost everybody. Because if they don't, what happens? It piles up, it overflows in the can, you start to smell it, it's stinky, the bag gets heavy, it starts to leak. It's no different with the things that we're carrying forward. The biggest issue is that most people don't want to actually feel like garbage even for a moment because they're afraid of what's actually behind it. But here's the most important piece for all of us to remember about the trash from our past. The trash from your past is not your fault. It just becomes your responsibility once you become aware of it or you start burying others in yours. But the second we start to put ourselves in that shame and blame cycle of actually assuming that it's our fault, the healing and the growth and the opportunity goes away. So we have to view ourselves objectively and non-judgmentally. But if we look at trash as an analogy, right, when we take it out of our kitchens, the smell goes with it, the heavy bag goes with it, we feel lighter, there's more freshness in there, right? Like it's a very obvious analogy, right? And here's the other truth. If you dropped your wedding ring in the trash, would you reach in and get it? If you dropped a family heirloom or some memorabilia that is so meaningful to you in the trash, would you reach in and get it? Right? If you drop the keys to your car, your house, your office in the trash, would you reach in and get it? See, we're willing to reach into physical trash, but the trash inside of us, we're more afraid of than anything else. And the reality of it is that most of our treasure is actually formed
Gold's in
and
the trash.
created by all the trash pressure. It's a reality that we have to face, right? And so to fully unlock who we are, we ultimately have to go down this path. And it makes sense even for those who are saying, well, I don't have time, I don't have the energy, I don't want to do this. Okay, great. Low frequency energy and emotion triggering that edge, that armor that you're carrying gets heavier the longer you carry it. It incrementally crushes you the more that you do. But the other side of it is it zaps your time, your capacity, your energy, and your focus because you're spread so thin. And so by allowing ourselves to identify and remove what no longer serves us, we're not only lighter, we have more capacity, we have more focus, we have more energy, and we also have more time. And so what could you do in terms of repurposing
By the
all
way,
of that?
that's the that's the secret is you actually have more time,
Tons.
which is mind blowing.
Yeah. And that's what people are always saying. Well, we can't create more time. It's the only, you're right, but we can bend and manipulate it.
Mhm.
We can understand how to exist in a present moment and actually allow what's real to exist in front of us. Because the truth is, anytime you're reacting to things from the past, largely nothing to do with what's in front of you, which means you're not being present and active, which means that your armor is guarding whatever beliefs intellectually and emotionally have been created that your life is only further validated. Right? If you're living in the future, it's fabricated. It creates fear, hesitation. Again, you're not present. You don't have access to all of your capacity. So to me, it's simple. And the highest of high performers, when they start to understand this, they're like, oh, that's why I want to feel like garbage for a little bit longer, because ultimately they don't need to in perpetuity.
Oh, so nice. So you know, it reminds me like when in order to defend all this stuff, in order to keep this armor up, it takes so much energy and your engines are revving. Like a good part of your capacity is just keeping,
Yep.
phasers on stun like all the time. And I was sitting on my meditation cushion one day. I was reading this silly book called Spirituality is the Damnedest Thing by Jed McKenna, and had no idea that this was going to happen. And I was meditating on the book, and then all of a sudden, it occurred to me that my entire life, all my energy, everything I do all day, every day, was to defend and create a version of Mark J. Silverman. Like everything I do all day, every day, every cycle of energy I have is to make up this guy. And that I'm not this guy. I'm just this thing that I made up. And I sat there. It took 3 days for me to get my bearings again after that. That I spend so much, like there's so much more energy available to me if I stop working so hard
Yeah.
to keep all these things at bay or keep this
Mm-hmm.
facade up. So when I hear you saying, like, the question I was going to ask you is, how do you get someone to hear what you have to say? How do you get someone to hear we have to go stick our hand in our internal garbage to get the gold when they're like, when things are going and firing on all cylinders? Because usually for me, somebody's got to hit a wall before they'll listen to me.
Yeah, I'm very upfront with people when they come into my world or when they start coaching, and I'm very transparent up front that if you're not curious, have a desire or the courage to stand in your truth, you're probably not ready to be in my world yet.
What does it
Which what
mean to
does that
stand in
also
your truth,
mean?
though? What does it mean? Like, because a lot of the people that I start coaching with wouldn't even know what I meant if I said, you need to stand in your truth. They'd be like, what? What does that
Yeah.
mean? What does it mean to stand in your truth?
So it's to look at everything, all the good, all the bad, all the moments of trigger, all the high levels of joy, freedom, and fulfillment, and to be able to unpack them all to understand our intellectual, emotional, and physical narratives in the ways that we have created our beliefs. Right now, what does that mean for some people? Okay, I've got a client who's an unbelievable creative. She's in a very niche field and she's been doing it for 10 years and she's amassed such a following that she averages 7 million views weekly on her channels. She does a phenomenal job. Her greatest trauma was connected directly to her profession, her creative endeavor, that came from this hesitancy to step into all of what she's worth. So in the very first coaching call that we have with her, we identify this resonant cellular memory that took her back to a moment in 12 when she was going to perform for her family, who were all intellectual and operate in a very pragmatic business type structure, and the creative side is foreign to them. She wasn't seen, she was criticized, she was judged, she wasn't accepted, which caused these beliefs that made her feel like being a creative is never going to be good enough in this world, even though it's what drove her. But what did that also do? It impacted her worth, her value, her ability to negotiate things. She has such an extensive network across the vendors and suppliers, as well as people that actually perform and sell the products in her industry, that she makes introductions that are worth multi-millions of dollars on the regular, and yet she gets nothing from it. Right? She has the ability to literally drive traffic for her clients in a very simplistic way. She doesn't get it. So 6 months into working with her, having unpacked that and a whole variety of other limiting beliefs that came in emotionally and intellectually, she's standing in her truth and starting to actually reach out and grab what she's worth. She just landed her first influencer contract that requires her to do 2 posts monthly for 6 months. It's a $50,000 contract and rev share on top of the product placements, as well as she's in the process right now of doing some overlap agreements where when she makes an intro for a multi-million-dollar piece, she's getting a cut of the deal. Right? She has all of this right in front of her. She's built it, but she doesn't even know what she has because she still didn't believe she was worthy. Right? That's standing in your truth, is getting to the place of actually unpacking this. I've got clients that literally have communicated to their teams they had 17 months of liquidity and they were going out of business. 3 months into working together, we find out that their deepest shame that was causing their inability to negotiate contracts, that they're getting taken advantage of, they're being emotionally and financially extorted, they aren't asking for what they're worth, they have control issues that aren't letting them delegate to their teams and actually give themselves scale to go run their business. Right? Their deepest trauma was connected to their dad and their brother between the periods of 8 and 14, and these trigger moments with looks that any male that gave any resemblance to his brother or his father would cause him to shut down, retreat, and completely lose all of his gifts, even though he's phenomenal at what he does.
Right.
Right? I could give you 50 other examples. Standing in your truth is going to those places that hurt, that have caused you to actually not step into your power and potential, and have caused you to protect yourselves, because self-protection, armor, is always a direct correlation to protect pain.
Right. So are you saying that doing this work is profitable?
Oh, it's unbelievably profitable.
Are you saying that you could be even more successful and free?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Make more money, actually receive more, live in abundance at a level that you've never even imagined. Yeah, it's possible.
Thank you for being a stand for that. Yeah, I could talk to you all day, like we did even just on the introduction call. Brian, the work that you do is phenomenal. The impact that you make and the ripple effect just blows my mind. I'm so glad that Jeff connected us. Uncle Jeff connected us. I haven't called him Uncle Jeff yet. Now, next time I talk to him, I'm going to call him Uncle Jeff. But if people want more of you, where can they find you?
If you're on the web, go to brianbogert.com. If you're on social media, go to @BogertBrian on any channel. We do a lot for free. We're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as we can by reducing the level of suffering that exists on this planet. So any impact to any of you causes what I believe, which is that moved people move people. I'm just trying to move as many as I can.
So all of those are going to be on the website, so you can just click on the link if you're driving and you don't have to think about it. Brian, thanks for being here.
Mark, thanks, brother.
Everybody else, thanks. This was a confronting conversation. If any of this resonated, we're both a stand for doing this work, and you have no idea the gifts that are waiting for you. Thanks for hanging with us. I love you a ton. Have a great rest of the day.